recording. All right, so I'm not calling the meeting to order because we do not have a quorum, but we do have our town attorney available to us. And so I want to give the members who are here an opportunity to ask questions, just engage in a discussion. We won't be taking any action unless and until a fourth member arrives. We have two that unexpectedly canceled today. So for the members who are here, there's our another member. Oh no, that's Jim. He's not a member. So for you three, our town attorney is Phil Socher. He is with Bernstein Sure and is a top-notch municipal attorney. I did receive some questions both from Barb and from Lynn that I sent to Phil. So, and just so that Phil would have a chance to prepare for this meeting. So Phil, do you want to start off by addressing maybe some of the questions that you've received, and then we'll take questions from these members about what they legally may and may not do as far as regulating moorings?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me. And I'm happy to come back to a meeting if you'd like me to at some point to discuss a little bit further. The first question I had was about regulation within 200 feet of the shoreline. Essentially, can moorings be allowed within 200 feet? What's the rule around 200 feet? Are moorings allowed outside of 200 feet? The short answer is that refers, so the 200 feet comes from something that the Bureau of Parks, a rule that the Bureau of Parks regulates, and it's the it's called the sorry, I've got it right in front of me. I was looking for the actual terminology, but it's essentially the safe water area. And there's a rule from the Bureau of Parks and Lands, Rule 3, that says essentially that no mooring may be installed beyond water safety zone. Sorry, that was the terminology I was looking for. It's called the water safety zone within 200 feet of a lake shore. So no mooring can be beyond 200 feet from the shore, or 1/3 the distance to the opposite shore, whichever is less. That deals with coves, for example. There could be a cove and it's less than 200 feet. The idea is there has to be a navigable channel, and where boats can safely travel. And so that's part of what the water safety zone is looking to regulate there. It also creates sort of a safety area for swimming areas too. But that's what the 200 feet is. The short answer is no moorings outside of 200 feet. The Bureau of Parks has been made that clear, and I've seen that in a letter, in fact, to another community I work with, where they made that clear to the community.
And just to one follow-up question on that. So if a cove is wider than 200 feet across, that means that that the mooring area would be within that 200 feet of the shoreline. Is that accurate?
Well, you would do a calculation. So it's 200 moorings can't be beyond 200 feet of the shoreline, or 1/3 the distance to the opposite shore, whatever is less. So in other words, in your hypo, let's say it's 300 feet from shore to shore on a cove. That means in that case, moorings could only be within 100 feet from the shore, and you have to leave a navigable channel. That's what it's getting at, in between where moorings may be located and where travel may happen for the boats. Yeah.
Phil, in a great pond or body of water that in a town that does not have an ordinance, who's responsible for enforcing that safe water safety zone?
The state Bureau of Parks regulates that, along with the it's not the Warden Service or the sort of the other regulatory body there, but it's through the Bureau of Parks. The person I'm sort of dealing with, there's a company called the Boating Facilities Division there, and that's where it's regulated. So the Warden Service works with the Bureau in terms of the actual enforcement authority, sort of law enforcement.
You know, if in the town of Winthrop that there has been a history of incidents on any of the lakes that are in town that the Warden Service had to get involved with regarding moorings?
I'm personally not. I've never been aware of it. I know when the town was talking about mooring ordinances a couple of years ago, whenever that was, the Warden Service came to some meetings. I was at one of them, but I know that they were at many of them. So there was some coordination that was going on with the town, and I know there was some input both from the Bureau of Parks and the Warden Service. So you may want to, as you do this work, reach out to those agencies to see if they have any input, or if there's anything, any issues of concern that they've had that you could potentially coordinate with them on.
Mike, I think it's fair to say that regulating or policing moorings would be a very low priority for the Game Warden Service. Fun fact, you know how many game wardens there are for the whole of Kennebec County? That would be 2 for the entirety of the county. And, there are 11 lakes in Winthrop alone. So you can imagine what a impossible task that is to police not only water bodies, but, the other things that the Warden Service is responsible for. So while theoretically the Warden Service should be policing that, you'd probably have a hard time getting a warden to show up and actually do that.
Understood. So that was my point, what's driving the ordinance, if there's no need for enforcement or hasn't been any enforcement or needs or incidences, why are we heading that way? Just a question, that's all.
And Mike, I'll say that's a good question to raise, because as I was studying some of the language that are being used by other areas and so forth too, you see some applicability, you see some non-applicability, and that does drive a thought process as I was reviewing the documents that, you get back to that question of the purpose of the ordinance. So, but I do have a comment back to the Phil, on this particular issue of, the discussion around 200 feet off the shoreline. I think, Phil, did Phil get these documents too, that we got?
I did not send him the
Okay.
ordinances from other communities.
Okay, good. I say that
But
because
Phil has worked on this before, so he may be at least a part of it.
And
I can follow up.
It's a
I can follow up too.
section that I have a question for you on, so I'll just read it. It's from the reference, the town of Harrison reference, or reference. And it's along the lines of the discussion we're just having on the 200 feet off the shoreline, and what kind of constitutes that, and what entity, I'll use that term, is the reference, or if you did have some sort of a compliance that you were addressing, we clearly have to understand who's gonna help us with that compliance, and is it already being regulated by another source, right? But back to the point, my question here, Phil, is in the Harrison one, there's under a section called mooring standards, there's a section here, it's section 2, I'll just read it really quick. I thought it was a pretty well-written component, and my question is gonna be, would this legally help if we found a purpose and then we continued with looking at this ordinance? Would this section be helpful legally for us? So let me just paraphrase it. No moorings are allowed between 200 feet off the shore of the normal high water line. And I think that's a piece that was missing in our discussion. We need to reference that component.
All that means is the shoreline.
Yeah, and shorelines change in different lakes and
Yeah.
ponds and streams.
Depending on the streams.
Yeah, so there's sometimes that could be a compliance thing. If we're gonna look at those things, we better get it right, I guess. As determined by the harbor master, and this is where they were stating some of the entities: Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, or Department of Agriculture, Conservation, Forestry, or other state agencies with designated authority. So the language really is a good paragraph. Number one is one of my points. And my question again back is, something, if we were needing a section like that, don't you feel that, broadening that out to that agencies with other designated authority would be a good component, and referencing the, mean high water mark as a baseline from a base position as a reference where you pull your tape line?
So I do think it's a good idea. I mean, I pulled this up while you were speaking, so I got the language you were talking about. I mean, in essence, what I see this is, it's essentially just reiterating state law what I had already read to you. It's reiterating it. It's making it clear for anyone just looking at your ordinance, so that they don't have to go digging around into the state rules and things like that on who's in charge. It references the two agencies that are involved, which the Warden Service, which is under the IFNW, and Department of Ag, which has the boat safety division I was talking about. So there are two different state agencies that are involved. So yeah, I see no harm, at least, in putting that in there. It's a truism. In other words, like these other two agencies do have regulatory and enforcement authority.
Yeah, okay, I thank you for that, and I do agree, and that's why I wanted to point that out as the discussion was happening a little bit, is that one of my personal goals of being on this committee is to, one, understand the purpose and if do we need an ordinance, but the second piece is to not try to regulate something that's already being regulated.
Sure. Yeah.
Bill, practically, my understanding of the state's responsibility was that they regulate the mooring if it's beyond that 200 foot from the shore. Is that accurate?
Well, they actually just prohibit it outright. So I think you could, so I was reading directly from the state rule when I was reading that, and it was also referenced in a letter that I have from another community that they just referenced the rule. So, but they do also regulate outside of that zone. I wouldn't say just completely outside that zone. They also regulate this area called the navigable channel. So in other words, and that gets to the 1/3 from the shoreline in a sort of a cove area or something like that. That's something that's very important to the department. That's why they sometimes will get involved in some of these communities. If you're letting moorings within the navigable channel, they will come in. I've seen it, and say you can't allow that.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point, Phil, that you're making, is that's that subjective area. That's a subjective area that's gonna be defined based on navigational ability through whatever the obstruction might be, changed throughout the course of seasons and so forth. So, thanks for that point.
Sure. A couple other questions that were sent to me ahead of time. So that was all 3 or 4 of them were all about the 200 feet. I think we've covered a lot of that. One question is, where does it state that the property owner has the quote right to place the first placement of mooring? I think that's getting to, and I assume you guys all have the statutes that allow municipalities to regulate here. It's in Title 38, Chapter 1, operation of vessels, dealing with harbor masters. That's where this authority comes from. So that's in Section 3 called mooring sites, and in that section, it notes that wherever practicable, the harbor master shall assign mooring privileges, and those individuals were in the waters where the individuals own the shore rights to a parcel. It goes on to say other things, provided that not more than one mooring may be assigned to any shorefront parcel of land under this privilege. So it's a whenever practicable standard, but that's where that comes from. There's also a grandfathering as well. So sort of notwithstanding that, it says if anyone had shore rights of 100 feet, regardless of the size of the lot, prior to January 1, 1987, they should be assigned mooring privileges under this. I wanted to point out one nuance there. So that's where that comes from. The question was, where does that come from? It comes from Title 38, Section 3. What's important to recognize in both IFNW, again, and I said, I've seen this from a letter in IFW just last year, but also there's a case. It's a Superior Court case. It's not a Maine Supreme Court case, but it's helpful. It's just that they pick up on this this language that says not more than one mooring may be assigned to any shorefront parcel of land under this privilege. What the court has said and what IFNW has said is that doesn't mean a shorefront owner can't have more than one, but if a municipality has an ordinance that regulates and assigns mooring rights, then they can only get that under a mooring allocation system available for other residents. So in other words, if they fairly get it through an allocation system, they could have 2 or more, but you can't allow just sort of 2 or more as of right to the property owner. It's just the one is where you can get assigned.
So Bill, this group has been talking about regulating or potentially creating regulations for mooring fields. So that standard would apply if there is a property with within that mooring field, correct? In other
Right.
words, let's say that
Let me-
where there's a mooring field, and if there are property owners within that cove, then they would be potentially allotted one mooring
right.
each.
Whenever practicable. This
Yeah.
is what the language says. Yeah, but they would be able to allow to be assigned one under there, and then the rest of it is through an allocation system. It's also important to note that once you start having regulations and assigning them, and this is where the town was starting to talk about this, earlier this year, last year, for some potential amendments to your prior ordinance that was repealed, is that there is a requirement of at least 10% of sites be available to non-residents for commercial purposes and 10% available for non-residents for non-commercial purposes. So you can't make them available only for residents or only for shoreline property owners, for example. And IVW takes that, I know, very seriously. In their view, it's the public right. The state itself owns the lake, if you will, the Great Ponds. So they want to ensure public access as well. And public rights, I should say, to moorings. Let me just make sure I tick off each of these questions. Is the removal of moorings mandatory in the winter? So there's nothing in this statute itself that says that, but that's one of the areas that municipalities can regulate. So in other words, that's one of the reasons why a municipality may decide to have regulation, because you could require that removal. For example, there may be other reasons to remove them that I'm just not aware of off the top of my head, for safety reasons or something like that. I'm thinking obviously snowmobiling is where it comes up the most in the winter. I don't know if the state would have some sort of regulatory authority over that, if it's sort of an unsafe hazard. But in terms of municipalities, where that authority would come from is from an ordinance that you could adopt in this area. If a mooring ball is removed in the fall, can anyone put a mooring in its place? Well, without a regulation, there's no real regulation around that, right? So if you have a regulation, if you have an ordinance, then you would have a system on whose mooring is where. So it really depends on if you're regulating or not. Is there a regulation mooring not closer than 25 feet to neighbors? No, there's nothing in the statute per se. That's something, again, that in an ordinance you could allow. And I think I just was looking at that Harrison one. I think they have that, or maybe another municipality was looking at had something like that. And maybe it wasn't Harrison. And then finally, I think this is the last one. And then there's one more in another email, so I'll get to that in a second. If a mooring is placed directly in front of a property owner's dock, is the property owner allowed to extend his dock into the moored area? I'm not sure I fully understand that question, or where that question's coming from. I guess that gets into whether how far someone has a right to extend a dock out into the lake. That's partly also regulated, I think, under the shoreline zoning laws, because you need a permit for docks. So I don't know. I was thinking about that. I didn't know, I really fully know the answer. I mean, if the town, for example, has a process of allocating moorings and they allocate a mooring in a certain spot, I think that's where the mooring can go. To the extent there's a conflict, the town could decide to move that mooring a little further out, assuming someone has the right to extend the dock the length that they want to. So I think you'd have to look at the circumstance a little bit, particularly what they're getting at there. Finally, there was one other question about, I think it was generally about sort of harbor masters what can the state allow us to regulate as a town without a harbor master? So that's been sort of a long-standing question that the town, I know, has been debating back and forth. Is you have a harbor master or not? Do you not have a harbor master? I'll just say sort of what I've said previously, which is the law, which I've been quoting from, the law in Title 38 that allows municipalities to enact these ordinances, specifically say they are enforced by harbor masters. That's what the law says. And it says all, municipalities that are empowered to regulate harbors, and to appoint harbor masters. So what I know the town was thinking about doing, the council had previously decided not to have a harbor master, but create a position called a mooring officer. One of the amendments that the town was considering earlier this year, last year, was essentially just making it clear that for the purposes of that ordinance, the mooring officer was the harbor master under the statute. The idea is that the statute only talks about harbor masters. A harbor master is the enforcement authority. There is one reference to code officers, but that's where the code officers can require owners to remove a mooring or float if it's going to be a public safety hazard. But otherwise, everything around moorings, regulation of moorings, that kind of thing, enforcement of moorings, it's all refers to a harbor master.
And so, Bill, a harbor master under state law must undergo some specific training in order to carry out those responsibilities. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's right.
And then, but the harbor master could be an existing municipal employee who undergoes that training. I mean, you don't necessarily have to hire someone separate and apart to fulfill that responsibility.
No, I don't see anything that would say a harbor master, that's their only job. I think you could wear more than one hat. You would be appointed the harbor master. I think a lot of Maine municipalities have employees that wear more than one hat. But you just have to make sure that you would qualify, and do the training as required.
Let me make sure. Does anyone have any questions?
If there were an ordinance adopted specifically for mooring fields, and there were a appointed mooring officer, which should be a harbor master, what do you feel the pushback would be legally from other citizens or mooring field people that would see other violations, but we're only going to regulate the mooring field? Is there a legality point that the mooring officer or the town could get into if we're spot zoning or singling out just mooring fields under that ordinance?
Yeah, a good question. I think I understand what you're saying. Is, in other words, if you just have you're regulating moorings, and then you decide you're going to do this mooring officer idea, and that's the only thing they're going to regulate for the moorings, and there may be other violations under the general rules, like the 200 feet, the navigable channel, all those kind of provisions. Yeah, I mean, someone could make that argument. I still think, and I still think it's best the best practice is, if you're going to do this, it's always, I should say this, I'll take one step back. But I said this to last council, I believe, is that if you have an ordinance, you need to have an enforcement mechanism. Otherwise, it's essentially just a guidance, right? If you don't have an enforcement authority, who is the person or office that's going to do it, and there's not a penalty for not enforcing it, it's just simply a guidance. So I think that's important. And the other hand is, it's important to me, follow what the statute says. So the statute here says harbor master. And so that's the officer, whether you call it, I don't know what a court would say if the town just says, you know what, we just like a different term, which kind of what was happening in Winthrop last time. I think it would, if you want to use a different name like mooring officer, I think you just put a definition in your ordinance and says, for purposes of this ordinance, a mooring officer is the harbor master for purposes of state law. In other words, we just like to call it something different, but it is the harbor master in terms of all the sort of authority the harbor master has under Title 38.
Okay.
I'm not sure that fully answers your question. If there are other violations, I guess is what you're saying, other non-mooring violations,
Right, like
in the lake.
Yeah, well, going back to the removal of the mooring balls specifically, we talked about removing mooring balls, making sure that we tie a jug off to the hardware below the surface of the water. There are a lot of markers, bumpers left on the lake. The town, I know, doesn't remove the swim buoys or the buoys out in the middle of the lake, that I think are more a hazard to snowmobiling and a lot of them along the shorelines too. So if they're gonna enforce and regulate the mooring field as far as mooring balls or any of the rules, or tackle, chains and making sure boats don't break free, it's gonna be hard to enforce that without enforcing, property owners as well, I feel like.
So,
see. Yep.
Phil, if you were to create an ordinance regulating mooring fields, could the authority of the harbor master / mooring officer be limited to enforcement within that field?
Yes, I think yes.
Verify some of this too.
Yeah.
You would know.
I wouldn't see any reason why you couldn't. I mean, you're designating a specific area, and it's got a review and a process as to why that field was designated in that area by certain permissions and such. And you're designating monitoring and compliance of that one area, so I don't see why it would have. It wouldn't need to be a broad strike across private owners and mooring fields.
Yeah.
So isn't, and Phil, thanks for coming. This is Jim Steele.
Oh, hey, Jim.
Hey, you left, I think, before the Department of Agriculture, Forestry, and Conservation gentleman spoke at that meeting. I was there and I remember the meeting. He went down and looked at the whole space, checked it out. The question to you that was asked about removing the mooring balls, it's not anything in there. It's just a wise decision because the ice and snow will wreck it. So it's just as if you wanted to protect your own mooring ball, it's a good decision. I think it's a good decision to do it for safety reasons either, but the state does not pull their markers for the sandbar or anything like that. In reference to the mooring officer, if you look up LD 626 that got put in place by the gentleman out of Greenville, that does state that you can appoint somebody to be the mooring officer. So it allows you to basically, you could like bump up the pay and have them do the training, but you don't have to have a specific mooring officer to regulate just that. You can appoint somebody. So that's already in the book. So it's LD 626. That I've been following along with it. But
Yeah, there was just some concern in the community that we'd be spending, I saw figures of up to $60,000
yes.
on a mooring officer, which is a little bit, so.
So my question goes back to the mooring balls, the tackle, all of the concerns as far as looking at it in a mooring field versus looking at it to everybody else on the lake.
Right.
I would like to know, why is the tackle, for instance, more dangerous in the mooring field that needs to be regulated than it is to the 300 moorings up along the edge of the lake?
Yeah, well, if I can speak for the group, we did the survey and people said that they didn't want moorings regulated in front of private property owners' shorelines, but they did think that, and by a small margin, did think that some regulations of mooring fields was appropriate. So I think that's what the committee's focused on.
But the purpose of the committee, the charge of the committee was to determine if there was a mooring ordinance needed, not a mooring field. That wasn't the purpose, that wasn't the charge of the committee. Do we need a mooring field? The charge of the committee was, do we need a mooring ordinance?
Right, but a mooring ordinance could relate only to mooring fields. For instance, I know the town of Sydney has a mooring ordinance, and it's specific to one specific spot on Messalonsky Lake in Sydney. So Matt, did you have a question?
Yeah, I got another, it's a legal question back to you, Phil, but you don't need to answer it today if you can get back to us, because I'm gonna quote some statute citation here, that just on a couple of ordinance sections. So in reviewing some of the mooring ordinances that we were taking a look at, there's one in Harrison and there's another one in Sydney. And they have a section, if this is to be some sort of an ordinance, so I do recognize your question, Roy. If they're gonna move forward, and we are gonna move in this, there's a section called authority. And that's getting back to your statement, Phil, around, if we're gonna go here, we need to understand what the authority is and how we can comply if that's the direction we do take. So my question is this. So in the, let me just get it for you. It's the Town of Harrison's ordinance, Phil. They quote, Town of Harrison is adopted pursuant to the enabling of the provisions of Article 8, Part 2, Section 1 of the Maine Constitution, Title 30A, MRSA, Section, this is the key point, Section 3001 and Section 4312. So the key point here, highlight Section 4312, is not consistent with other ordinances that I've seen. So the rest of those, that statement is, so Section 4312, I kind of want to understand what that is and why that's referenced in one and not another. And then there's one other section, Title 12, MRSA, Section 13072. And then highlight this section, 13073. It's the 13073 that is again out of sync from others. And I'm just curious as to what those two sections might be, if you can just.
Sure.
get back
Yeah,
to the-
so section 3001 is the general authority for municipalities and act ordinance under its home rule authority. So you'll see that sometimes in a lot of ordinances, it's just a general authority. 4312 is it's really not applicable in my case. So you'll see sometimes people cite things that don't always make sense. That's actually a citation to the comprehensive plan statutes under the land use and planning and land use regulation. I could see potentially someone making it's an authority statement of findings, purposes, and goals. I've got it in front of me. So it's a general land use comprehensive plan citation. I'm not sure why they would have cited that or not.
But wouldn't you think, just on that one point though, Phil, wouldn't you think that if a town had a comprehensive plan that was adopted, that would probably strengthen that to carry that, wouldn't it?
Potentially, yes. It's not a requirement in case, unlike zoning, you're required to have a comprehensive plan and have your zoning ordinance be consistent with that comprehensive plan. There's nothing in the mooring statutes that refer to a comprehensive plan one way or the other. It's just it's a general authority under Title 12.
And
I'm sorry, Title 38.
Yeah, you keep in mind that a comprehensive plan has no regulatory authority itself. It's simply a roadmap for where the town wants to be in 10 years. And
that's right.
And in thinking about our comprehensive plan, I can't even imagine which chapter that would go into, perhaps recreation, but otherwise it would seem like a duck out of water.
No, I don't disagree with the comments. It's a guide, and it's what we don't want to be writing is a guide. So that's why I was asking the question on that. Did you have a comment on 13073?
Yes, that's the general. So, and actually sort of ties in a bit with Jim's comment about LD 626. So that LD 626 was an LD that would have amended Title 12. Title 12, which is under watercraft and airmobiles statutes. 13073 is it's called Harbor Masters on Inland Waters, violations. And it simply says the person who neglects or refuses to obey any lawful order of a harbor master pursuant to 13072, which I'll talk about in a second, commits a Class E crime. So it's just a reference back to harbor masters enforcing. 1372 is what LD 626 would have amended, and that's what Jim was referring to. That was a bill that would have it didn't necessarily, and I've got it in front of me here. It didn't necessarily adopt a mooring officer, but what it said is, and I can look into this a little bit more because it looks like it was a bill that was then changed into a resolve, asking the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife to continue to study the issue. But the bill would have said, if the municipal officers of a town do not appoint a harbor master, they must designate an individual or entity who's responsible for dealing with inquiries related to mooring privileges or the regulation mooring privileges. And that person shall coordinate with appropriate law enforcement agencies about issues related to the regulation of moorings under Title 38. So that's what that LD 626 said, which I think is what the one that Jim was referring to. So, that would have, and sorry, that's a long way of saying that would have amended 13072. So that's to get back to that. And that just has it's called Harbor Masters on Inland Waters. Again, references back to our authority under the other statutes we've been talking about, and talks about the regulation of moorings is governed by Title 38. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
And one last question, my question's to probably Anthony, is, does the town of Winthrop have a marina ordinance?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, it kind of came up in my review of these documents too, just as I was thinking, is there a marina ordinance on file with the town? And so I wanted to ask the question also for preparing information for the whole group.
Yeah, and my understanding is we only have one marina in town, right?
Yeah, there's one on Cobblestone and that's being regulated, excuse me, by, being regulated by the Department of Conservation, Agriculture and Forestry.
Yeah, and if we were to come up with a marina ordinance at this point, that operation would be grandfathered probably under a lot of the regulations.
Oh, I wasn't raising my hand to sign up for that. I just wanted it for reference in case there was something in writing to kind of understand that we're not recreating a wheel somewhere. That was the only reason for that question.
So I have one thing to add to that is I don't think you have a marina ordinance, but marinas are regulated under the state shoreline zoning laws. And so it does show up in your zoning ordinance as allowed use in one of the shoreline zones, just the shoreline zone, but not in the other subzones. And there's so it does show up there.
So Barb, you've been quiet. Do you have any questions for Bill?
No, that was.
Mike?
Okay.
Mike?
Good. We'll just make sure, because I did write a bunch down. Here it is.
Matt, you have anything else?
Again, I can always answer questions through Anthony. If people have questions, you can forward them to me as you did today.
How about you, Yahoo? Do you have any questions?
Got a lot
Are any of them constructive?
I did have one other question, about enforcement again. If in fact we established a regulation and an ordinance for mooring fields and somebody else wanted to establish a mooring field on a different lake, what have you, there's a set of rules in place, and I understand that it have to be a whole application process. If this leads to more friends and neighbors type of deal where we're seeing an overloading of moorings again in front of lakefront property owners where maybe we can't have that 25-foot setback and we've got overlapping and moorings that are creeping out deeper into the lake, just to avoid fees in the future, how would that be handled?
Matt, is your mic on? Nope. Okay. I'm getting a little feedback here. So Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the group wanted to move forward with regulations of mooring fields, they may have two different paths that they could take. One is they could regulate the existing mooring field on the south end of Maranacook Lake and just leave it at that. Or they could create an ordinance that would, as Mike just suggested, speak to the creation of mooring fields and would provide regulations that would apply to any mooring field that might be created on any of the lakes.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's right. You could have a general regulation, for example, to the extent there are mooring fields, general rules about placement of moorings, assignment of moorings, those kinds of things.
So in that instance, Mike, I think it'd be important to, if you wanted regulations to touch all of the lakes, that you guys would create some regulations that could be initiated and administered regardless of which water body it was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I understand that, and I think that it would mostly apply to the lakes that have public access. You know, these mooring fields would more likely be near public access points. But my question specifically was, if it got to a point, because I think, you know, the whole reason why we're here, and Phil, maybe you can speak to this, because I think legally we found that there was no purpose and need for the ordinance in the first place, yet here we are with a committee trying to decide what to do with this. And I think that's right, but what happens if the underlying thing becomes, hey, I wanna put my boat on the lake, but I don't wanna deal with this mooring field, or I'm not paying a fee, and so-and-so, you know, just bring the boat down to my place. We end up with one or two properties or a dozen properties on any lake that all of a sudden has 6 or 8 moorings out. We've chosen not to regulate anything that has to do with lakefront property owners. And all of a sudden we've got one home that's got an influx of moorings that are overlapping and encroaching into neighbors' right of ways. If we're talking perpendicular lines out from their property, how would we deal with that if we've chosen not to deal with it? I guess is my question.
I mean, I guess if you choose not to have an ordinance, you wouldn't have any regulatory authority that I can think of. Right? The way you have regulatory authority under Title 38 is the municipality, you can choose to adopt an ordinance to regulate. You don't have to. That's a choice of the municipality.
Yeah, and like Phil mentioned earlier about defining what a mooring or a harbor master is or mooring officer is, I think you'd probably do the same thing with just a definition of what constitutes a mooring field. And so that may include the size of the field, it may include the number of crafts that are moored there. There's probably a whole menu of things that you could work into that definition to determine what constitutes a mooring field versus, you know, hey, I'm gonna let my friend moor his boat in front of my camp.
So, is there any regulation on how many boats can be in that 200 feet? Say you have 100 feet of shorefront and you're allowed to go 200 feet out. Is there a regulation of how many boats can be in that 100 by 200 rectangle? You were just saying, like Mike was just saying, you know, you could have a property owner with 6 boats, but if that person has 100 feet, how many boats are you allowed to put into that area?
Well, currently, there's no regulation.
Right. There's no you don't have regulation around that at this point.
I do. Yeah, Mike, if I may, I'm gonna kind of answer your question a little bit, because it's a theoretical question in with, if we were again to go forward. I think that the piece is a valid question that you raised, because, but in one of the things that you were talking a little bit about it was, again, going back to the reviewing of some of the things we've looked at. There's one section here that I actually highlighted that kind of talks a little bit about that. If we were writing an ordinance, let's just call it this is my scenario, that a field mooring ordinance like we're discussing right now, that has an effect, like you just described, on property owners. So I'm gonna use that term, it has an effect on property owners' rights. And those rights are defined by this 200 navigational channel, get out of the way, all those things we were talking a little bit about today. And then shorefront ownership and those perpendicular lines that come off there. And then the discussion we were just having with regards to, somebody could say, hey, I got enough room, I don't mind if my boats scratch each other, I've got 20 in here, I'm keeping them, you know? Right. That, as long as he keeps them, they keep them in their parallel lines coming off that shorefront, there's no infraction, there's nothing to bitch about, I guess is how I'll say that, no pun intended, but in this case, there was this one here, so I just wanted to share how one person wrote this a little bit, and it touches in the last section, like touches on a little bit on what it might look like from a standpoint. So this is again going back to Harrison. It's section 3. It's section 3. It's called purpose. The standards are designed to ensure that the mooring installation does not impair the health, this is getting back to that purpose and need type approach. Does not impair the health, safety, welfare, or result in lower water quality, loss of aquatic habitat, interference with navigation, interference with fairway, that's a term, that is legally defined, or infringe on the interest of property owners. So they did consider it, Harrison did kind of consider it, Mike, like you're asking, and trying to address that one component around that. And if we were to move forward, I would advocate for a section, something like this, to define that a part of the reason for doing this is to not have a negative ecosystem change as a result of what we're implementing. So that's how I would say that, just as a suggestion. Just
Right, there's gonna be a point where a scenario like that would infringe on deeded access or, right of way owners too.
Yep.
That abut properties and.
Yep.
At some point, they may fester.
And all of those things, I would suggest that we keep be within the confines of what's already being regulated as a property owner's rights. There's agencies already out there that don't step on my line, or I'm gonna call
Right, so,
somebody.
but, so the town would enforce the mooring field, but the state would be responsible.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's under the enforcement.
So with all these hypotheticals we're talking about, it seems though we're still looking for the problem. We've got the answer, but we're still looking for the problem.
Well, and I don't know that that's maybe the right way to phrase it, Roy.
We've set on an answer, but we're still looking for a problem.
No, I think that the group did a survey of the community. And what they heard from that survey is that people seem to think that, yeah, maybe some regulations of some mooring fields was in order. And so now I think they're just exploring, well, what would that look like?
Have there been any actual issues though? Have there been any problems that we've actually had to address?
Well, I think Barb would say that there's a problem in front of her place.
Yeah.
Well, Barbara lives right next to the town dock as well. I mean, there's no, I've been down there many times. And there's no boats directly interfering with her shorefront. There is the traffic from the town docks.
There are no boats that are within the 200 feet, but there are boats in front of my property across on the other side. And there are boats.
Yeah, but it's across on the other side.
Yes,
Which that could be on any pond of water, I mean, any other shore.
It could be somebody from the other side that owns shorefront over there.
but it's,
Please, go ahead.
sorry.
I don't want to interrupt the discussion, I just wanted to
That's
be clear,
within
I wanted
200 feet.
to ask.
Those boats within the 200 feet of the other shore, so technically that could be somebody on the other property having them out there.
It is true that it is on the other side, but it's also true that there are a large number of boats that are in that small cove. Currently, there are 14 balls of, flotation things out there, not counting the 2 that I have. So there's 16 out there now, and there were actually more boats. Some people took up their things already. So that's a lot of boats in that small area. And a lot of people do feel that it doesn't look good, it looks crowded, it's detrimental to the property values of the area. And I did happen to look at the survey, and it is true that it's 55% to 42% that want to have the moorings regulated. And so we sought to find out what the town wanted. We did the survey, and the survey has indicated that they do want us to have some kind of regulation on the mooring.
By a slight margin.
True,
It's not overwhelming.
but it still is, we are honoring what we got, the response we got.
So Roy, I want to go back to your question because it's something that, after the last meeting we were at, I asked myself the same question you're asking. was the purpose for this ad hoc committee to decide an A-B question, is what I call it, or, and.
And that was.
Is it a question that's defined by A or A and B? And I think in some cases, I think what we're talking
It
about.
wasn't this.
Do we need, so the question that was raised, just to be to the point of it is, do we need a mooring ordinance? And then that's the piece of the discussion, is that's a pretty generic question that could say, you know, then do we define, is a marina in that? Is houseboats in that? Is mooring fields in that? Is private property owners in that? So that was the question I asked too, Roy, of myself, and I said, geez, are we done? Are we done our job? We've looked at the survey, we've looked at some of the things, we've asked some of the right questions that we felt. We got some good relative volume of responses. I thought we had a discussion on that, Anthony, too, that the volume we thought was pretty good for the survey.
Yeah, it was, well over 300.
And, so in that case, though, I came back and I struggled with the question a little bit, and that was my point to you, is that, so then because I was one of the members that brought up a mooring field type ordinance personally. And I guess one of the reasons why, and is a very strong reason why for me, is to protect the rights of the property owners. And I like the decision that we made with regards to the private property owners were saying, hey, we're not, when we ask specific questions, the voting was stating, you know, we don't see an issue here. So back to your question of has there been a lawsuit we can quote or something like that that's had a problem? But getting back to it, the question that bugged me was this: of where the moorings are located down in the reference Small Cove. The thought that came to me was, I know there's been a lot of discussion on it. There's been a lot of debate on it. There's been a lot of time and effort and expenses put into it. And the question that came back to me to help ask the question to the group of, do you think maybe we should look at a mooring field ordinance, is to not have to be having the same debate and conversations and time and effort on the same issue. Maybe 10 years from now, 7 years from now, different counselors, you know, different members, different decision thinking, was to kind of preserve what is going down there and the aspect that there can be cohabitation in the uses down there. So I will say, I just wanted to share back with you that I just wanted to share back with you that point. I don't know if it clearly answers what you're looking for an answer, but I did drive some of that because of the reason of the fact that really concerned with the fact that I don't want to be back in the same discussion 2 or 3 years from now.
And I think that we've proven that we can cohabitate down there without any issues.
Well, perhaps, but who's to say that 2 years from now, to Jim's point, that it's not 30 votes instead of 12 or 15, you know?
And I understand
Yeah.
that, and that is.
How dare you call me Jim?
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Look over here, look over here and call me Jim. I do like the younger age.
So that is a question, how will they come? Because every year there's more boats and they come further out. How close can they come to the public boat launch, and will that be a problem? And I know that you were, saying that there are no boats within that 200 feet, but my next door neighbor, there are boats in front of his property and they do block his access. And I actually was the one that wanted to know if my neighbor has a boat that is moored right off of their dock and they have trouble getting in and out, can they extend their dock and force that boat to move a little? So to say that, yes, it's just, there are two property owners, but we are property owners, and it's kind of like legally you can park an RV on the road, but you don't really wanna have 5 of them in front of your house.
I understand that, but also, you know, to your point, with as far as just a simple asking, has the neighbor reached out to say, hey, could you move your boat?
Actually, they were, refused in a very, rude, they were cursed at in front of their grandchildren.
And
So I said, but we don't wanna get to.
yeah, and lest anyone,
But,
yeah,
but no, that really happened.
but lest anyone thinks that someone's gonna lose a right, I don't get the sense from this group at all that they're looking to take away any of the rights of anyone who's been using that cove and mooring their boats there for a while. They just wanna put some potentially put some boundaries around it, just to make sure that it doesn't ever get out of hand.
It just doesn't sound like it's a potential thing.
We'll talk after this, council. All right, we are gonna have to wrap it up.
Yeah, but I understand the point. I think it's all good discussion. I mean, I think everything you guys are discussing here, and I don't sway either way. You know, again, well, no, I moor my boat down there, and I'm willing to kind of share the space, however it makes it applicable for everybody that's down there. And then if you have to define a space for us to fit the folks that are there, I know you count, I think you might be a little off your count, but I'm not, it does semantics, but I know there's 12 of us there. And there's 2 on the other side that are people from not part of our group, but I understand not wanting to let me grow too much bigger. And I understand I wouldn't want somebody to come in and Anthony, because he's been begging to do it, put a more rectified mine and bang against my boat all day. So I get that point. I think, and then there's a discussion about size and how do you place them. We've had them in a certain place right now and they'll bang, so we already kind of know how we can put them, but it made it easier for people for us to swing and stay out of somebody else's fairway. Or the other property owner, I mean, I met him, waved to him, he seems very, very pleasant, and I really feel bad that he got a pleasant scenario happen there, but again, to really get down to it, I think it's wise, when they come decide something, I think it's having something fair, for everyone to use the space, because it is state body water, so.
So this may be a little unfair to ask, since we only have 3 members here and we are a 7-member body, but how do you think that we need to move forward at this point?
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I am, as far as mooring field regulation, I'm okay with protecting what we're doing. I will say, we've had no incidents with the group that's down there. I have no idea who you're referring to.
So Mike, when you talk about mooring field regulations, are you thinking only at Marana Cook or something that would be applied to other lakes?
No, I think it needs to be applied to all the lakes with
Okay.
public access, honestly. Because what's to stop, I mean, there's a brand new boat launch down at Annabescook, and I think that would be an attractive spot. At some point, you'd see something appear down there. You know, it's been controlled. It hasn't grown to the point, and the fact that people think that it's unsightly, it doesn't really count, unfortunately. The boats in a harbor, in a lake in the state of Maine, and some people think it's as beautiful. I mean, if you look at the town website, they use the lower banner as a picture of our boats down at the end of Maranacook. And the same picture hangs in the bank at Kennebec Savings. So I don't think the opinion that it's unsightly can be used with everybody. It's a matter of opinion, not law. But it is, as Jim says, it's a usable space for everybody. It's not a navigable space. It's not a through waterway. It's a dead end lake, and it's a unique spot where it borders the street and the railroad track. So it's an obvious place for people, taxpayers, to be able to use the lake.
So Barb, how do you think we should be proceeding?
I think that we do have a mandate from the town to go ahead and come up with some kind of ordinance that regulates mooring fields, and I agree with you, they should be for all of the lakes. I think that the mooring field that is there is going to stay there, and I think the people that are there ahead of time are gonna probably end up having moorings, but I would like to see it regulated, I would like to see it further away from, my neighbor's dock. And maybe some regulations about how close they are to each other, so, yeah, I think we'll have the ordinance, we'll have some regulations. We will not, I mean, I would like it if it all went away, but I'm not gonna get what I want, so I would like it if it was regulated, so they were not too close together and they were not coming out further. I don't know how they can moor along the railroad track up opposite of the boat ramp without being a navigational hindrance.
Matthew?
I'm gonna say that, I'm here to move forward at the direction, I guess, of who gave us the original direction, and maybe it's best if we go back, if we were asked by the council to proceed, and do we need a mooring ordinance, and this committee was put together,
So let me just stop you for a second. You guys have already gotten your charge from the council, so I don't think we have to go back and get more permission. I mean,
So if that's the
they've already
case,
given you
I'll take that direction from you then, and if you give me that direction, then my understanding would be, since we are convened and we are moving forward, that I'm in support of, as I've already stated, that we ought to take a look at a mooring field ordinance. And this is a good start. This discussion's been great tonight. The information that we've got, I think we could put something together tonight. And not tonight specifically, but out of some of the information and with the other parties in our team, and present it to the council for their decision.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, that is what we've been charged with, is bringing a draft. Nothing that is cast in stone, nothing that's probably gonna cover every scenario that everybody could think of. But we'll do our best to put together our best recommendations on a mooring field ordinance. And protect the property owner's rights.
So now I have a question for Phil. Phil, do you have any recommendations about, maybe where you've heard what the group member said, where we go from here? Do you have any suggestions of how to move forward?
Well, I think you'll need, because this is really more of an information session tonight. You're meeting without a quorum, and so it's not a meeting. So, you should have you should have another meeting, have a quorum, have a discussion among the members and a vote on what direction you want to move forward. So then you'll have an official charge, if you will, then to draft an ordinance, have Anthony, with my help or whoever's help, or you guys can draft it yourself if you want, and have me review it. But at that point, that's what I would say. And I think it's useful to not reinvent the wheel if you don't have to, to the extent that, one of the members quoted other ordinances that are out there. To the extent there are other ordinances you can pull upon, I think that's always helpful too.
Yeah. And so, just so you guys know what that might look like is, say the group decides, agrees with the three of you, yes, let's move forward with some ordinances. You guys give me some bullet points as to, okay, we wanted to address this issue, this issue, this issue, and maybe with some specific details. And then, as Phil said, the way he and I have typically worked is, I'll take the first run at it and craft something, and then turn it over to him, and then he puts the lawyerly touch to it. And then we would bring that back to you guys for your review and approval. Sound good?
Sounds good. I feel, Anthony, that we've got the direction to move forward. I'm not quite so sure we need to have another quorum or a vote to move forward.
Well, and maybe not, but if that's the case, Matt, we need to start putting the devil to the details, right? And say, okay, these are the things that we would like the regulations.
Absolutely, and I think I guess that, Anthony, was more of my point for the next meeting, is to really kind of dig into more of the discussion like we have as a group,
Yeah,
knowing, we can open up the meeting to kind of refresh the fact that we did have this discussion with public input around the fact that there was a question around, do we move forward?
and just to reassure everyone, we're recording this tonight. I want to share the link with the other members so that they can sit down and watch this, and they'll be, hopefully be fully informed as to what happened here tonight. So, Phil, we appreciate your
Thank
time
you.
and your help. Thank you,
All
sir.
Thank you very much. All right,
All
take
right.
care.
All right, and since we're not really in a meeting, we don't have to officially adjourn. We'll just say good night.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, too, thank you everybody for your time on this. You know, I think everybody's thought process, and I get a chance to say it, but I try to say it at every meeting, is about the quality of water related. I think having mooring sometimes does benefit quality of the water because it doesn't allow people to come lake hopping, which I know, you know, that might introduce milfoil into other bodies of water. America's never had it. Other than Whittier, that we never do. So that's, I think it's the biggest piece, I think, we're a big proponent of the same.
And I appreciate the discussion tonight, guys, around the move forward or not move forward. I really do. And I wish we'd had the bigger group, Anthony.